recording this, and my goal is to be able to, on-sell the video later on as well. So if you can't make it to class, hopefully, if I remember, there'll be a video to watch later. Just switching over to my other screen now. And that should pop up there. And go to camera. And there we are. It keeps flipping over to video for some reason. I'm not sure why it does that. But anyway, there it is. I'm going to mute everyone if that's okay, just so that there's no background noise and you can hear me. So I'll just do that, and we can have chats later on, or if you have something to say or questions to ask, please do so. I want you to know that you can participate in this and we can all contribute. So if you have, comments or questions, please don't hesitate to ask me something. You just need to unmute yourself, that's all. Okay. I don't know what's going on with Karen and Robin. I've let them in a million times. Anyhow, I'm not sure what else to do about that, so we'll carry on. All right, so this bloody, what did I say that for? This lovely duck. So what I thought I would focus on for the black and white picture is, I'm finding someone isn't muted. If you can, could you just turn your microphone off? I can hear some background noise in there.
You can mute all participants,
Oh, can I?
Under your participants, if you do manage participants, and then...
We've got plenty of milk. You need pears.
Milk?
Thank you, we need milk and pears.
I don't need milk and pears. There we are. I think that's good now. No, it's not. Anyway, que sera, sera. All right, so this little black duck, I thought he was quite beautiful. I love the colours of the water. I think it's just stunning. So if we can capture the light and the reflections and things in there, that's going to be amazing. So I've given you a little black and white picture as usual, and this is the one that we want to refer to start with to get our drawing right. And as I said, if you've already done it, then that is awesome. Well done. Have another go at it, or get yourself set up for the next section, which is the colour version. I think there'll be a bit of time involved in this guy today. So let's get cracking and just do a little charcoal sketch of this guy. You can see that on the paper I've gridded that up a little bit more than usual. So we've got a lovely line halfway across the page or the picture, and then another one down the middle. And then I've also put a few down into those, so we've got quarters or eighths, just to help you find the duck within that picture. And so I think it's really important to be able to do that and to be able to see, where everything sits in relation to the grids. It's a great way to learn to draw. So focusing just on the duck, I'm going to start to pop him in based on where he's situated within those grids. And you can see the bottom of the body is on a slight angle. What I'm going to do is put my finger over the reflection so I can only see where the body of the duck's sitting on the water, because the reflection can get confusing and it kind of all looks like one. So let's start at the tail end, and the bottom of the duck is about just over halfway up within that second bottom half, if that makes sense. So it's just a little bit above the halfway line. So if the halfway line was there, it would start about here. And it kind of has this lovely rounded base, and it comes up towards the center line. And then under the center line, we've got that lovely arc where at the neck starts to bend and we get that beautiful curve in the neck. And you can see where the neck curve is nearly on that halfway line, but not quite. So you can kind of visually just measure the distance between the neck and the bottom and the halfway mark. So I'm just going to see if I can admit these two again. Goodness me. Anyway, so distracting. I'm very sorry. Trying to do 24 things at once here. Okay, so then you can see that the bill, the duck bill, actually goes all the way across nearly to the other grid mark. So that quarter grid mark on the left, the duck bill goes to just before there. So that's a really good way to measure where it sits within this whole picture. And then how far down is the top of the head from the edge of the page? And I would say it's probably about a third down, a third or so. And so that way you can kind of work out where that line sits. I think my bill's too high. But this is just a nice way to get familiar with the shape of the duck and draw in all those little shapes and marks and lines. So every single piece of this is a different shape. It's a blob of some description, you know. It's either a squarish shape or rectangular, round. And the best thing about the grid is just measuring how far away from the line everything sits. So you can kind of put all the pieces in there and just break it down visually in your mind or in your eye so that each section has its own little shape and fits within different spaces on the grid. So even coming down to the base of the duck, I can see already my head's way too big and I've come over too far. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to know that now before we do the next version or the next stage. So I'm just, who's here now? Susan. Okay, so just looking at the back of the duck and how high above that halfway line the back little wings come, or the feathers, and then it kind of arcs up and comes down again and across into that side quarter. So the duck potentially or mostly takes up pretty much about half of the painting. And so we get to feature that beautiful water in the other half, which is really lovely. All right. So I'm just drawing in the basic shapes that I can see within the black and white picture. And I want to be looking at tone as well. So it's about noticing where it's darkest and lightest and what's happening with the tone and the shading of the feathers. So I wish I had practiced this. I should have. I would be much better at it by now. So the thing is, when you're drawing something up, is to make sure you keep checking the picture and referring to the grid and draw exactly what you see as far as, you know, measurements and dimensions and things go. We tend to make stuff up. So if we think, you know, ducks have that shaped neck, then that's what we'll draw. And sometimes you're a little bit off. So it's important to notice the shapes and try to get as close as you can to having it all, you know, the right shapes. Otherwise, if your drawing is off or wrong, then it's never going to work. So that's the key, is to get your drawing right first. And oh gosh, so many people having problems today. Sorry. Crazy. All right. So the neck comes down, kind of narrows off just under the chin there, doesn't it? And then it comes out in this beautiful little round shape on the chest area. And those kneadable erasers are your best friend. So I can just take some of that off where I've gone a little bit too wide. So just keep checking the distance. Check the distance from the back of the head to your grid mark, that center mark. Where does that sit, you know, within that quarter or eighth part of your page? And just keep checking. Even if you have to use a ruler, sometimes you have to, you know, measure things to get precise. And that's often a really good thing to do because it really helps you get more exact. And if your drawing's right, everything else will work out. If your drawing's wrong, then no matter what you do with colour or tone, you can't fix it. It'll just never be right. So it's really important at the outset to spend the time getting the drawing right. Otherwise, you'll just have a world of frustration and you won't be happy with what you've done. And I like feeling happy with what I've done, especially if you want to frame something or do it for someone else or pop it in a gallery. So it's a good thing to make sure that your drawing's right. It's a skill I'm still working on. Okay. So once you've got the basic shape of your duck in there, and maybe put some tone in. So blend it around. Look at your dark. See how dark it is on the neck there and on the top of the head. It's really quite dark, and then it gets a little lighter towards the back of the neck. So that's telling us where the light's coming from and also where the shadow is, and of course the colour of the bird as well. So I've got some beautiful blues and greens in there, which are going to be fun to do. And now into the water. So I do want to focus on the reflection as well. And so that's important because it's got to kind of be pretty much the same as what we've done above. So what is above must be below. So we've got to get that in as well. And just noticing where all the shapes are. So, you know, the tail, for instance, the top of the actual tail looks a lot shorter than what it's looking in the reflection because obviously that's looking up from a different perspective. So noticing that kind of thing is important too because that's going to help with your drawing as well. So darkening off around where those reflections are, and then you can tell, you know, that there's water there because we've got those lovely loose lines that sort of look like waves. So that'll be fun to do, to kind of make it look watery. So this is such a good exercise just to get familiar with your picture, get to know it a little, you know, better before you start going on to your colour version. I'm usually very impatient and I don't like, you know, I just want to jump straight in and get into it. But it's important. It's really, really worthwhile doing this because it helps so much. Okay, so I'm just going to darken off that reflection there. I'm wondering if there might be a limit to how many people I can have in here. Maybe that's why. That's why it's not letting people in because I've got 3 now that can't get in. I might have to have a look at that in a minute. Pretty sure it was supposed to be unlimited. I'm just putting a few watery marks in because I can't help myself. It's nice to kind of, you know, give yourself some gravity or placement of things. So you can sort of start to feel like you're getting familiar with the whole thing. But I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on the water because if we did that with the charcoal, we'd be here forever and it'll take a little while. But don't be afraid to get your fingers into the charcoal, push it around and vary those beautiful tones so that you're getting your lovely lights and darks happening. Makes a difference when you blend it all around a little bit and start to get a little bit of those feathery textures in there. And then where it's quite black or dark, you can push a little harder and get that nice and dark with the charcoal. Black feathers on the top there. So, as I said, I wish I had practiced this. I should have. I was too tired yesterday. Couldn't deal. There we go. And if you want to take anything out, so if you want to whiten their areas up, like around the little neck area there where we've got that white band, just use your eraser to mark that in lightly, and you can just reshape your eraser and get a nice sharp edge on it, and that should take enough off to give you a few light spots. Lovely. And then the reflection is a little more muted than the actual duck, isn't it? So it's kind of grayer and darker. So you can kind of soften that off a little bit more, and it doesn't have as much white in there. So it's much softer. So it looks a bit like a cardboard duck, mine does. And it could do with a bit more work, but I think we really need to get stuck into the colour version so that we can at least try and get that nearly finished today. I'm not going to promise we will because it's a big one today. And that just means that everyone's going to have plenty to do for this afternoon. It's actually nice to be able to just stay home, I reckon, don't you think, and just keep going if you feel like it at the end of the class. If you don't have to pack up and leave. You can just have a little break and then sit down and get stuck into it again. So it's a nice thing, I think, to be able to just continue on. You're already set up, so may as well. Why not? Okay, so let's leave that part there for now, and we'll move on to the coloured version. I've just got some missed calls from a couple of people, so I'm going to pause for a second while we get set up. What I'll do while I'm doing that, though, is I've already selected some colours for this. So I'm going to pop them here on the screen so you can see the colours that I've picked out to do this painting with. And there's quite a few greens because I can see quite a lot of green in there. Just a sec, Susan, won't be long. And yeah, there's lots of greens in the water and beautiful blues and greys in the duck. So they're the colours I've chosen. So if you want to kind of just get your colours together. I'm not sure. Hang on, Susan. I'm just going to pause for a second and then I'll come back to you. Yeah, hang on a second. Okay, there we go. I will be back very shortly to see if I can get these other ladies into the class. They're having some problems and I'm not sure what that is. So won't be long.
It's definitely not unlimited for Zoom, Jeannie. There are numbers on the account. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you go into your account settings, you can probably increase it.
Thank you, Selena. You're really helpful with all this gear. Thank you. All right, I will be back shortly, and grab a cuppa if you can. Just give me 5 or 10 minutes and then we'll get stuck into it. Okay. So I'm back. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I've checked my Zoom account. I can have up to 100 people, so that's not the problem. I've resent the link to the other ladies, so that's the best I can do for now. Okay, Robin dropped out, but you're back in now, so obviously that's not a problem for you. And Karen's trying to get in, so interesting. I just can't work out why that's happening. Anyhow, hopefully you can hear me and we'll carry on. So has everybody picked their colours? You're all good to go and ready to get started on this painting. What I've picked out today is a black paper because there's quite a lot of dark in the background. So I like I like working on black, but I think lighter colours like those yellows and greens and things are going to be beautiful on the black. So tape your paper down, and because I'm working just on a table on a flat surface, I'm just going to pop my tape onto the corners and not worry about putting it all the way around. Sometimes I'll put it all the way around, depends where I am and how long I think it'll be on the board for. If it's something that'll be there for a long time, then I'll tape it all down really nicely so that I can make sure that it's not going to move and stay put. Okay, so first thing we need to do is rule up some guidelines, and I'm going to use this coloured pencil today. So it's a skin tone kind of pinky colour, and it's a great colour to have. It's a good all-rounder because I can see it on my dark paper as well as on my light paper, and it also it's just a good all-round sort of colour that works on pretty much everything except its own colour, of course. And if you can only manage to get yourself 1 or 2 pencils, then this is one of the great colours to get, sort of a mid-tone pinky colour. And I'm not going to press very hard with my lines. I don't want to mark my paper too much, because as you know, if you press hard with your pencil, you will kind of dint the paper. It actually, puts a mark on it, which is great when you want it to stay there. But if you want to be able to get it off later, just make sure you press very lightly, and only ever use a pastel pencil, of course, or a charcoal pencil, because those ones are the ones that work nicely with pastels. You'll find a lead pencil, graphite pencil is not a good option because it actually stains your painting, and you won't be able to remove it. So you can always see lead or graphite underneath pastel. Yeah. Okay, so let's get cracking on this baby. I have my picture beside me on the iPad as well as printed, so I'm a bit greedy like that. I like to have it as everywhere as much as I possibly can. And then we're going to start drawing this up. So again, it's just about outlining the duck and figuring out where she sits within our page. You can refer to your little black and white picture if you want to do this, because that's going to have the other grid on it, which is something that I'm relying on anyway to try and get my duck in the right spot. So just marking in the shapes that I can see. So we've got different shapes in the back feathers there, and how they kind of overlap each other and where they come to within the grid. It's great to use it like that. So that's one little shape there on the wing. And then the bottom of the ducky, so the angle of that is interesting. And it's often handy just to use a little ruler to try and get the angle right. So what I've done is place it on the picture, and it's about at the angle of the body of the duck. And if I'm clever, I should be able to slip that out of there, keep the ruler in place, move it down a tad, figure out how far down that goes, and then just lightly put a little line there so I can find that angle again. So there are little ways that you can cheat or take shortcuts. I shouldn't say cheat, it's not really cheating, is it? But take some shortcuts to find the edges of things or the angles of things. Use rulers, use, scale dividers. Have you heard of those? So a scale divider is a tool that you can get, and it looks like a compass, and you prong it out, and so it crosses over halfway, kind of like that. And so if your picture is larger than what you're going to be painting, then you can actually use the scale divider to measure things with, say, this end. I'm just doing a little rough demo on my screen here. So I could use this to measure something, for instance, the width of the duck or whatever, like that. You could measure the width of the duck, and then you'd have it scaled to a certain percentage that you want to scale it down or up to. And then you flip it over and then you draw the measurement of the duck on your paper. And so this measurement on the smaller end will be correct in relation to the larger end if you keep doing that and using the same scale. I'm not very good at maths, so I'm not quite sure what all those terms are, but that's technically how it works. And then going the other way around, if you had a smaller picture, so you would do it this way and you'd measure maybe the duck's head is this wide, and then when it's crossed over at the other end, it's that wide. So that's going to be your measurements for when you do it larger scale. So they're a great little tool and far more efficient than 2 pencils like I just had. So yeah. So that's also a great way to draw things with a scale divider if you want to get your measurements spot on. Great. Okay, I've still got people trying to join, so that's going to drive me crazy, the whole class. All right, so I've got the angle of my little duck here, and I can see that it kind of comes across at the bottom there and comes up. So what I'm doing is looking at the space between the edge of my page and the end of the duck. So the little tail feather pops out around there. And see how that has this lovely little curve on it. It's got a really nice little twist to it. It's a bit like a flower petal, how it comes down like that. So that'll be fun to do later on. And I've got that funny little feathery bit that pokes up just there too. I've gone too high. I can see that now. See, this is why the grid is so important, because I can see that's all too high. And I would have kept wandering along doing that had I not noticed that the grid mark was right there. So that means that little curly feathery bit at the end there comes just above the little grid. And then we've got a line that comes up there and the wings come out above that. So always checking. It's so good to have that reference point because it just keeps your drawing on track. And you've got to keep measuring it visually. So just keep checking everything with your eye. How far down is it? How far away from something are different things. And it will help you get your drawing right. Okay, so that's, again, I've gone wrong. So, and checking the angles too. So that's always a really good thing to do, is check your angles and your directions. So it looks like a bit of a messy duck at the moment. I've just got a few loose lines in there, and then I'm going to come up into the neck. So the neck is actually the tricky bit, I reckon, because it's got to be pretty spot on, hasn't it, to get it the right shape. So I'm just going to hold my paper up in front of me. Sometimes it's easier if you've got your print upright in front of you. It's easier to see than trying to have it flat on the table and looking down. So I'm just very lightly marking in my duck head. And the top of the head is so distinctive in shape, isn't it? It kind of comes down and sort of leads straight into the beak. And then noticing the angle of the beak and how that's getting down across there, almost to that other grid line, if you look at your black and white version. And then the curve of the neck as it comes around and then down into that chest line. So I'm feeling like my duck is very short and fat. He's feeling a little bit too low. I think that head's too low. So I'm just going to take that out with my eraser and whack it in again. So re-looking at my measurements, it needs to sit up a bit higher than I had it. So it does pay to practice. I reckon everybody who's already drawn this up before class will have this down pat. And you'll do a beautiful job because you've rehearsed it already. And there's so much value in that. Okay. And the duck, the beak, and the neck. So the neckline is kind of comes up Still got the top of that wrong. It's a tricky one. If I was at an easel, I'd be much happier because I could step away from it and keep checking. So I find sitting down at a table is a lot harder because you don't have as much freedom of movement and you can't keep stepping back, checking what you're doing. Looks like he's got a fringe now. And he's kind of facing away from us, isn't it? So that changes the angle a little bit. It's not exactly side on. So that's another little challenge, I guess, to get the shape right for this guy. Going to leave it there for now and get down into the reflection. So the reflection obviously is just whatever is above is below, but it's a lot more muted and grayed off. So it comes across there. And almost down to the bottom of the page, really, doesn't it? Yeah, it does come down all the way to the bottom. So again, I've made that too short. Maybe my duck's too high. Just going to get a ruler and measure this because it's important. So 40. Okay, so it's about halfway down in here. So it was too high. But lucky I can still see that little angle line that I put in before. So that's given me a good reference. It's looking better already. Isn't it amazing what one little mark will do? So it's always just checking. If you have to measure, you know, it's really important because otherwise this will look terrible. And then I can bring down those other feathers all the way to the edge of the page. It almost bleeds right off there. And again, checking those grid marks, they're so useful. Telling me where everything sits in relation to those lines, how far away they are, and what angles and directions I need to do. So he's looking better already, I think. That's good. It's good when you resolve something because often you can sit there and think there's something wrong with this and I cannot figure out what or why. But you've just got to kind of keep persevering with it. All right, cool. So now we're going to start to block in some colour if you're ready to move on with me and start playing with the fun parts because that is the fun part, definitely. So let's do that. I'm still trying to admit people. It tells me they're joining, but then it doesn't work. I don't know. Technology, you got to love it. Okay, so what we've got, what I chose earlier are these colours, which I left here before so you could have a look at them. And I would really like to just kind of zhoosh a few around in the background just to kind of get a feel for how they're going to play together. If you want to, you can test these colours on some other paper and just see what happens. But sometimes I just like to jump straight in and put it bang on there and see how it works. And this is a kind of a goldy yellow colour. It's a dark yellow, like a mustard almost. And then I've got this green, which is a sort of a dirty khaki green. And I can see that colour in a lot of the shadowy sort of areas and the darker areas of the water. And of course, being on the dark paper, I can leave a lot of this undone and just let the paper do some of the work. So that's going to help to support in those darker sections. So I'm just going to swoosh a bit of this darker green around. I'm not going to get too caught up into the shapes in the water or the, you know, the whirlpool-y kind of things just yet. But do notice, you know, the direction that everything's moving in, because that's important. So we're just blocking in at the moment. Just going to block in some colours, get them on the paper, and then we can start to kind of push it all around. I think it'll be fun to try not to blend too much today and just keep it sort of loose and let the pastels mingle together on their own. So I'm now using my mustard yellow. So this is my darker yellow. I do have a lighter one. I think that's lighter. Yes. Ooh, isn't that nice? So that's the lighter yellow, which is rather lovely. It's not a lot different to the mustard. It's just very similar in tone. They look very similar. If you squinted at those, you'd say they were pretty much nearly the same tone. This one's slightly lighter. But it's nice to have a little bit of a range of colours. So I can see there's a lot of yellow or bright yellow up here behind the duck's head and towards the top of the picture. And then we've got this kind of more muted greeny kind of colours on the side. I'm going to pop a bit of this little yellow one down here. This is my brighter one. Sorry, I'm dancing around. This is what I do, sorry. Pick one up and go with it, and then I find something else. But that's the lovely thing, isn't it? You can just pick up colours and put them down again. So I want to get a little bit of that on there just to get some base colours in. And then I'm going to come back with my mustard yellow again and put a bit more of that on. So this is a little bit duller, this yellow. It's more kind of that greeny yellow colour that I can see over on the left-hand side there. So there's some really beautiful green kind of tones there. And just check the direction of the water. So on the left here, I'm doing these swirly marks. Can you see how I'm kind of coming around behind the bird? So I'm kind of overlapping the bird a little bit because I don't want to have a gap between it and the water when we start doing the bird. But doing these nice swirly sort of marks so that we're getting that whirlpool kind of feeling around the bird without putting in too much detail just yet. But it's really good to start to indicate the gesture of whatever it is you're painting early on, because you want to be able to feel it. It's all about, you know, movement and texture and how things are feeling. Great. So that's that. And then I've got, what other colour have I got in here? I've got this lovely green. So it's kind of like a leaf green, and I can see a lot of green in here. So obviously there's a lot of greenery around this water and it's being reflected in here. So I'm just going to pop a bit of this beautiful, it's a leaf green, kind of not bright green, and kind of, yeah, like a grassy green, I guess, just to put some of that in there too. And again, make sure that you know, imitate the shape of the water there so that you get that lovely ripple around the front of the duck. Cool. And there's also some green up the top there. It's kind of everywhere, really. But you can see there are some areas that are more, you know, yellow, and then there's other areas that look a little bit more green. So maybe that's reflection of a tree or something further away that we can't see in here. That's what's nice about it though, isn't it? You can actually make it up, I guess, or imagine what might be around in the area in where the duck is. Okay, now I've got a really pale yellow here. I'm excited to use it. I feel like I should wait, but you know me, I'm a bit impatient. So I'm going to pop a bit of this light yellow in. It's a Schminky pastel, a brand new one that I unpeeled before. And I just love the brightness of it and the light. It's gorgeous. So that'll be fun for the highlights. I'm not going to use too much because I want to kind of save the light for last, which we do, but I just want to see how that's going to look with these colours. Oh, it's quite lovely, isn't it? It's very nice. So I put that down before I get too carried away with myself. All right. Now I do have this other green which I picked up as well, and it's a darker green. It's not phthalo. It's a blue green, but I can see quite a bit of that too, just in certain spots within this water. So I'm going to kind of mark that in a few different areas, because it does definitely have this cool green within the water there. Now you can see as we're sort of running around this with different colours and marking in, just sort of not randomly, but you know, selectively, I suppose, just checking the colours on your picture and seeing where different colours are situated. This is it's slowly kind of filling it all up, isn't it? It's starting to get that lovely full look without getting our fingers into it. So I haven't actually put my fingers in there yet. I'm trying to keep my fingers out of it today and just let the pastels do the work, because the pastels can actually blend without us helping them too much. They kind of pick each other up as they run around the page, and you can get, you know, a really nice effect with just loose pastel on your paper. So what's happening for this one, what I've been doing is that I can still see a lot of that black paper through the pastel that I've already put down, and that's not such a bad thing. I don't mind that at all. I'm generally not a loose painter. I do like to push it all in and fill it all up, and I guess I'm more of a realist artist than an abstract artist, but it's a lovely option to have, isn't it? And if you choose, you could literally just leave that like that and then just continue to add a little bit of yellow or green here and there where you can see it's thicker. So I've just popped a bit of green here in front of the duck's chest, or yellow, sorry, and I don't know if you can see it, but I can see on the picture that that's quite strong, that yellow area there. And see how that kind of just highlights it a little bit and lifts it out from everything else. And what I've done is I've pressed a little harder with that, and it's gotten a thicker sort of coverage, and now it's starting to look like it's got some light bouncing off it. I don't mind the black showing through. It's quite nice indeed. So looking at the water, let's just focus on that for a minute and really look at the colours and how they're situated. So up behind the duck's head, at the back there, where there's a little bit of light as well. So there's like a shiny light section top above the head on the slightly to the right. So there's like a white area here-ish. And then as it comes down towards the duck's head, there's a more yellow area, isn't there? Just around there. And then off to the right of that area, it goes a kind of a dullish greeny colour. So I've just picked up that khaki kind of green colour that I started off with and putting a little bit of that in. What I'm doing is moving my pastel in the direction of the water. So it's really important to notice what the water's doing, and everything behind the duck pretty much is sort of running in a horizontal direction, isn't it? Because that's the way the water's going usually. And if you move your pastel or your stick in that direction, so go left to right, don't go up and down and round and round, because that's not the shape of this water. So you've got to follow the lines of the thing that you're doing and try to follow that. And usually when you do that, it'll all appear to be what it is. Okay. Over on, we've got a little bit of a green reflection just above the duck's head there. And for my greens, so the reed colours, I chose this green and this one. I don't know, that might not be quite dark or light enough, but let's try it. So I'm just going to pop a bit of that green in through here. It's too dark, but that's okay. So what I've done is a little squiggly line, just squiggle, squiggle, squiggle down through there to the top of the duck's head. And that's obviously a reflection of something that's on the other side of the pond or whatever this is, lake. And so I'm just going to pop a little bit more green in there. And what you want to do is keep this line kind of uneven. You don't want a sharp, straight line. We want to keep it soft and uneven because there's ripples in the water. And when there's ripples, that's where you get movement. And so we want to try and make sure that we keep that movement happening because there's a lot of movement going on here. It's quite lovely because the water's all moving, but the duck isn't so much. Well, it's sort of sitting there on the water. And so that's telling us, you know, a story about the water. I've just picked up a phthalo green. Now, that phthalo green is going to be nice on the left-hand side of the water up the top here. It's kind of got a little bit of darkness, sort of more muted. And again, I'm doing sideways lines and marks as I come down towards the duck's beak. I can pop a few little dark marks into that bright yellow section as well. And that's going to help to create even more movement in that area. Cool. So it's just keep checking what's going on here and picking up colours and mixing them around. I'm going to pop a little bit more green over here on this right-hand side. We're going to put the reeds in afterwards because what we're doing is working on the background area first and getting that in, and then we'll pop the reeds in over the top because they sit on top of it. So it's a whole lot easier to get them in after rather than before. I can also see that lovely light colour. So as I'm doing this, I'm sort of using the pastels to mix with each other now. So it's almost like I'm blending, but I'm keeping my fingers out of it as much as I can. Well, I am actually, which is pretty amazing because I do enjoy blending with my fingers. But I'm just going to try and rely on the pastel today to do that for me and keep some of the paper showing through so it starts to get some lovely shadow and tone happening. Lovely. So where it's lightest is up behind the duck on the right there that we talked about before. And I've popped a bit of this very light gold or yellow in there to pick up some light. And also around the front of the duck, so where we've got this little lovely whirlpool sort of shape going on. And so that's lovely there. That tells us that the light is bouncing off that area and catching on those little ripples. So you don't want, you know, continuous lines. Kind of got to keep your lines broken so that you replicate the movement in the water. There. And so by keeping the lighter areas up behind the duck and down here on the left in the front, it kind of gives us a nice range of tone within the water. And so the water appears to be darker up the back on the top left. So you can see there's a little bit more shadow or darkness up there. And that could be because there's more trees or more foliage or something that's not catching the light so much. So it's good to, you know, vary the background a little bit. You don't want it all the same. It's got to have some variation and be a little bit interesting. And that's what caught my eye when I chose this picture, was just the beautiful variations in the colours. I thought it was lovely. So I've just darkened off on that left-hand side. I know it's not quite that dark in the picture, but we can exaggerate things a little as artists. That's our right, you know. And what's art if you can't sort of make it your own anyway and add a little bit of dark or light or you know, make it more dramatic than what it is. So quite happy with how that's working out. I might just touch up that little reflection up here of that tree or whatever that was, that green bit there. You might decide you don't like that bit, so you could leave it out. That's up to you. It's fine. Okay. So what I want to do is get onto the duck. If you feel like touching up the water further afterwards, then by all means, go for it. But I really do want to get stuck into working on the duck before we run out of time, if that's all right with you. Okay, we've been going for an hour, so I'm just going to take a 5 if that's okay. Grab a drink of water and refresh myself, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and continue on. That'll give you a chance to either catch up or have a break or do whatever you need to do, and then we can carry on. So I'll see you soon. Okay, so blue violet, lovely for your shadows, just darkening off some areas with that. I do prefer to use a shorter stick because these long new sticks get quite clunky, especially when you're working in a smaller area. So that's why I've got little short stumpy pieces of pastels rather than full sticks. And so that's my short bit there, which is hard to see on there. And I can use that, up here underneath the neck of the duck where it's got some shadow. So the light's hitting the side and the back of the head, and that's why we're seeing those beautiful green and blue colours. But the shadow is underneath, so I can pull that around underneath the head, and then maybe a little bit under the beak as well, just to kind of start defining the edges of that as it comes out. So basically that's blocking in, all the areas with the different tones or colours that we can see in this guy. And then we can start to add some more colour over the top of that, and it'll build up gradually and start to get some lovely texture. I haven't put the little white band on around the neck yet. I'll probably leave that till last because it's a light area. If we put it in now, it's just going to get sort of mixed in with everything else and create a kind of a white shadow within the colours. So I think we'll leave that for now and do that last. So, I like to save the light for last. So as you're doing this, you keep looking at your water and going, oh yeah, I could put a bit more light there and a bit more dark there. So feel free to do that. If you've got, for instance, if you've got a blue violet or a dark colour in your hand and you think, oh, it's a little bit darker just there, you notice things as you go. So it's all about just being aware of different things, and different things will catch your attention as you're doing your painting, and you'll just want to pick up, a different colour and put that where you can see those tones. So it doesn't mean you can't get back into the water, not literally, it's a bit chilly today, but you can definitely, touch things up as you go. So don't be afraid or worried about doing that, because it's absolutely fine to do that. So I'm just looking at my reflection here in the water, and I'm going to darken that up because I tend to pick up a colour and then I'll just put it wherever I can see it on the picture, if it's, in line with what I'm working on at the time. So, and as I mentioned earlier, working from the back to the front is always a much easier option, I find anyway, rather than trying to, it'd be difficult to get in behind the duck if you had already finished that to do the water. So think about it logically and work out, which parts could I work on first and what can I get back to afterwards, and am I able to move around freely and do that. So it's you kind of got to figure it all out as well. Think about this, have a strategy, I guess, in place. All right. So we've got a nice bit of blocking in going on there, and that's working out quite well. So I'm just going to finish off putting some of the reflection in with this dark while I've got it in my hand. And again, the reflection is not as bright or vibrant as the actual dark. So we want to keep it kind of grayed off a little bit, but using the same colours. So I can see around the tail, remember we said before the tail has a different shape in the water reflection because it's looking at it from a different perspective. And so it's a lot bigger and rounder in the picture, or in the water, sorry, than it is on the duck. And I think I've gone to, it's not quite big enough actually when I look at my paper and how far away from the edge of the paper that sits. So again, keep checking your measurements, keep making sure that you've got things in the right spot. And I'm literally just very lightly wiping over everything with the pastel and keeping it quite light. I don't want to get too much colour down on there, because if you do that, then you won't be able to put more on afterwards. So it's always good to leave some space for yourself to add things on after, if you feel like you need to build up your colours, or you know, get something else on there. So the reflection is more greyed off than the actual duck, and it's kind of got all those little ripples through it as well. So I'm just going to focus on that bit at the moment, and then we'll move back into the duck and get some more detail happening with that. But for now, it's just good to notice, you know, the little ripples in the water around the reflection that sort of bleed into it around the edges, so you still maintain the movement of the water. So I'm going to pick up my mustard yellow colour again and just sort of bleed that in over the reflection colours that I've done. Softly, softly, just to get the edges a little bit wobblier, I guess, because I don't want sharp edges there. I want that to look like it's in the water and that it's got, you know, all these ripples going through it. So, and you don't have to just use the one colour, the one yellow colour, of course, because there's all sorts of colours in here. So that's just one example, but you can pick up other colours and do the same thing. And also notice with the reflection itself how it's also got ripples in it. So there's no hard, sharp mark or lines in here. It's all got a little bit of a ripple or a wave through the edges of it. And so duplicating that will help to give it the movement that's in the water. There we go. Now I haven't done anything on the beak or the colour of the beak yet. To me it looks quite limey green. So I'm going to pick up the green that I used earlier in the water and just pop a little bit of that in here, just in this reflection area. Because I've got some dark down there already, it's kind of not too bright, which is good. I don't want it to be too bright, but it's just hopefully reflecting the colour that we'll have in the beak a little bit. So we don't want this to be too definite or too strong. So keeping very loose today. This is very, very loose for me. Most unusual. I usually like to fill my paper up, but I'm trying to behave. Trying to be strong. It's difficult. I really want to stick my fingers in here. Chances are, if I get time later on, I might finish this off and do exactly that, because yeah, it's just how I'm wired. But for this class, I want to try and keep it loose, because I know a lot of you enjoy doing the loose work and keeping it nice and free and letting some of that beautiful paper colour show through, which is what we should do, isn't it? Because take advantage of those colours that we can get the paper in and get some beautiful, really nice paper colours. Lovely. Okay, so I feel like I'm going to leave the reflection as it is now. I don't know about you, can you see some light blue in there? I feel like I need to add that. I mean, it is definitely up in here, and that's where I was going to go next, but I might just pop a little bit of it down into the tail reflection as well, just so that continues on with that colour. And down through the body reflection. So I will be putting this blue up into the main body, and I guess we need to make sure we have some of it down in here as well, just so that it looks like it's all connected. So this is a sky blue. It's like it's nearly grey actually, but it's a lovely, nice blue tone. And yeah, I can see a lot of blue in there. There's also more dark in the reflection. So see, this is what happens. You just keep checking things and then you go back and want to touch up again. So feel free to do that. You don't have to just stick to one spot. You can keep moving around. And it just keeps you a lot freer and means that you're not focusing on just one area, but you're focusing on the whole thing as a whole. Yeah, good. Okay, so I'm going to get back up into the duck now and start working on getting some light going on in there with my blue. So this is a lovely little sky blue colour. And of course we can go even lighter on the lightest sections. So what I'm doing is saving my light for last. I didn't actually pick out a light colour, which was interesting, but I'll definitely add a little bit of highlight here and there. So I'm using, again, a short stumpy piece of pastel and just wiping it on its side, running it across there and trying to get the feeling of the curve of those feathers. So pulling the pastel in that direction. So it's kind of coming from under the bird and then up and getting those lovely little feathery marks in there. And then to give that even more texture, so I don't know if you can see, if you can zoom in on it or get it up close, but all this feather under the back here is kind of soft and wispy as it comes up into that dark tail area. And then it keeps soft and wispy and comes around. Then we've got some little feathers just in here, just underneath, as we come around the side of the duck on this light blue section above the water. So just on the water there's some little loose feathers that sit there. I'm still using my light blue, but I'm using the sharper end of it just to get a little bit of kind of detail in that area there. And then over on from the chest and across, we've got what look like black and white kind of feathers, which will be fun to do. But what I'm doing is just longer marks to kind of indicate the shape of those, because they kind of come across and overlap this other back area there on the side. So it's about noticing the direction of everything and where it falls in relation to whatever else is around it. So that'll probably require a little more work, but it's a good start. And then coming around on the neck there, so the back of the neck comes down, and then we've got these same little feathers that sort of come around from the back of the neck down below here, below the beginning of that wing and through there. So it's not a lot, but it's just enough to tell us which way the duck's facing and where those feathers are. So that's important. So can you see, as you're moving your pastel around on your paper, it's starting to take form and look like texture. And so if you move it in the shape of the feathers, hopefully it'll start to look like those. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find a lighter colour actually, because I just want to lighten up just in here and get a little bit more tone in there. If you look at your black and white picture, you can see it's quite light just in that section there. So I don't know if I'll get a lighter blue or maybe a pale grey. Not white though. Maybe a very pale blue, I think. See what that does. I'm also going to grab a purple while I'm here because I didn't get one earlier. Purple's lovely for your shadows. Okay, so this is a lighter blue. It's very dirty lighter blue. What I want to do is just get some of that on here, and I'm just doing little marks with it to keep the edges of it a little bit soft See how that's just highlighted that section there? It's quite nice. So it's all about getting just really subtle changes in your tones. So even though that's the same color or similar, you know, same family of blues, it's a lighter blue. And so it sits on the other blue really nicely and starts to give me a feeling of thickness and texture building up, which is good. This is good. Now we've got to repeat that down in the water because it's also lighter down there, but don't press as hard, just press a little bit lighter so that it's not quite as bright in the water. But it's still got to reflect that, hasn't it? So you can see how that reflects now. Cool. So this bright colour will also be great on the tail. So in that section there, I've just drawn a line where that will be lighter on the little bit of tail that's poking out there. And then I'm just going to do some wispy kind of marks for those feathers that are longer. They're kind of longer feathers and they curl up a little bit. So just trying to get the feeling of those happening. Okay. Maybe should have started with the under part of the duck rather than this bit, because now we've got to get in behind that a little bit, but it shouldn't be too difficult. So up in behind this section, I've already put some dark there, so we can actually just pull that around a little bit to get the curve of the feather. So what I'm trying to do is create that curve feeling. I'll come back to the tail in a minute. As the body forms and it sort of folds over the top of it. And so because I've already put dark in there, if I pull it up with my fingers, it's starting to kind of curl around a little bit. And then with my other blue, so not my lightest blue, I'm going to come back in and find that little wing there. See that little wing that sits there? So it just pops up there. It's funny, I've got this thing on an iPad, but I keep looking at the print. Have it. So it sits up like that. And then it kind of curves down. So what we want to try and do is get that lovely fold happening from dark to mid to light to get it to look like it's curling around. And then right down inside behind these blue feathers that are on the chest or the bottom is darker in there. So if I pop a bit more blue violet through there, darken that up a bit more, then that should give us a bit more of a fold, a bit more drama in that area. So the tricky part is not making too much mud. What we don't want to do is get too much of the dark into the lights and lose the lights. And that can happen really easily. Okay, this bit here is bothering me. So the part where the light feathers meet the water and then it goes up into the neckline, but I'll have to come and back, sort that out in a second. So again, we've got lovely little light sections. I've picked up my lightest blue that I just grabbed earlier to put onto this top bit here. And again, just moving the pastel in the direction of the feathers so that you're trying to get that lovely textured feeling going on. So obviously the light is above or on the other side of the duck, so it's catching the edges or the tops of everything. So that's nice, isn't it? It's sort of giving us a nice feeling of light and dark. I'm just putting this light blue on the tip of that furthest wing over there, because that's also catching the light just on the top. There's not very much at all. There's just a little bit of blue in there and a little bit of the very light blue. And then that little wing, the edge of it pops up out of the back of the bird, so you can kind of see just the very tip of it up into the water there. And then we've got another one that comes out longer into the water as well, so over like that. Just going to zoom in on this guy so I can see it better. So he comes out through there and then down under those other two. And it also has this, I'm going to use mid-grey for a start, this grey colour. And it comes down through there. And sort of gets lost in the darkness on the left-hand side, but you can see a little bit more of it on the right as it comes up through there. And then I think I need to put some more water in the behind it there. So see in this gap here between the tail and that wing we just did, I should have a bit more water in there. So it looked like it was part of the bird and I hadn't filled that part in. So I'm going to pop that in now because it's always easier to put that in first rather than later. And then I can come over the top of that with the little curly bit on the tail. And clean up those edges a little bit. So I just want to make that water continue on down. You've probably already got it in there. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. While I've got this bright yellow in my hand, I'm just going to add a bit more light to my water. So when I'm squinting at that, I want to be able to see bright brights and dark darks now. So that's what we're working towards, is creating this lovely range of tone. All right, so back into the wing now. I just want to darken up that little bit that's poking out over the water. So I needed to have bright water behind it so that the darkness of it would be obvious. So it's always about thinking, you know, if this is light, then that's got to be dark, or whatever it is that you need to do to make things stand out. Okay. So now I've worked my way over to the tail, and I popped a bit of blue in there earlier, and I quite like how that's working. It's giving it some lovely warmth. It doesn't have to be super obvious. This is the ultraviolet beautiful blue, the one that we'll put into the neck again. But mixed in with the blue violet, this colour just makes the most lovely purpley sort of colours. And it just gives it a bit of warmth. Makes it a little bit more interesting than just dull greys and light blues. So I love colour. That's why I love pastels, I think. Just love colour. All right, so before I get into the tail though, I'm just going to touch up this little wing that we were working on before and get some more light just on the edge of that, because I can see it's got a bit of light catching the edge. And then as it comes down behind the other feathers, it goes darker, so it kind of disappears down in behind there. And of course I've got a lot of dust sitting on my page, so I'm just going to tip that off. Cool. Okay. Now, we haven't got into the head and everything too much yet. I'll get back to that in a moment. But I do want to work on this back end and get these little tail curly bits done. So I'm just going to mark in those little, what look like walking stick kind of shapes at the end there. It's obviously part of the ducktail. And then darken off again under the tail. And then can you see where the little fan of the tail is? It's got this lovely little light edge around it, and it comes down on the side on the right there, and then it flips over, and then it comes down in the front. So it's got this lovely little turn like a petal coming across, and it goes quite a long way across, all the way nearly to the next light section. So it's got this nice little flip almost. And to do that, you have your mark. So on this side, it's a little thicker, and you can see it fans out. And then as it comes around the top of the tail, you get a thinner line of the blue or the light colour. And then as it comes down towards us, it thickens up again. So, but it's tapered almost. So it comes down to a point and then it's tapered up. So you've got almost a triangle shape in here that gives you that little feeling of it flipping around. So see how you go getting that to do that for you. And underneath, in the meantime, I'm going to put a few little grey marks because I can see it's like a feathery effect. So just inside here, under the tail, at the other end where we started, it's got these little fluffy lines because they're the feathers, and it's not as black as right underneath the tail on the body there. So I've used my mid-grey to get some little marks in there that look like some texture. So hopefully that will help to make the tail look like it's turning. Okay, so now I'm just going to check all my shapes, make sure I've got everything where it needs to sit. And if you need to kind of put some feathers on top of something else again, just to get that layering happening, then do that. Kind of touch up all those little areas. Nice, nice. Has anyone got any questions or worries or concerns or anything? You're all good? Mm-hmm. Okay. Don't forget to pipe up if you do. Okay. All right, so we've got a few little wispy bits just around the base of the neck there that we did earlier, and I'm just going to make them a little bit more wispy. So you're always correcting, always not correcting, but checking and touching things up. And that's what's so lovely, isn't it, about pastels? You don't have to wait for anything. You can just jump in and do it any old time. Okay, so I'm going to start working on the neck area now. And I can see I've zoomed in quite close, which is great. And there's quite a bit of like a purpley colour in there. Now, because I've put purple in there, I might wait and see, but it might need to be somewhere else as well. But I'm going to wait and see how that looks. So that's over the blue violet. So I already had some blue violet in there, and I've just popped a little bit of that in there because it's such a nice contrast. And when I zoom in, it does look quite kind of red or purple. Okay. And then we've got our little white band. So as I said earlier, I'm not going to put that in just yet, but I do want to kind of mark where it's going to go. And if you use your light blue, then that'll give it a nice little base that we can put white on over the top after. So the trouble is when you're putting light down somewhere, you either have to leave your paper clean and don't have anything under it, any other colours, or you need to kind of try and get a lighter colour underneath so that when you put the white over it later, it'll pop. Cool. Let's get up into this fun neck bit because it's so beautiful, these colours. So I've got a dark green, and zooming in is awesome because I can see that is actually a lovely dark green just around the base area there. It's quite nice. And then you can add a bit more of this beautiful ultraviolet blue, ultramarine, sorry, and just work on the shape too. I feel like my head's a little bit too flat. I don't want to make it any bigger too soon. So this is where you've got to be a bit careful. Make sure that you don't, do something bigger than what it is, because it's really hard to undo, especially when you've got your background in already. So just patching a bit of that blue in there, and then I'm going to find that lovely turquoise colour and put a bit of that in there as well. So nice mixing colours on the paper. It's amazing what you can make. Zhoosh them around. So that's got a lovely glow to it. I feel like I want to add more brights though. Might see what's in my box over there. So just have a look, see what other emerald kind of greeny colour I can find. Green is the colour that eludes me the most. I don't know why, I just feel like I can never find the right one, even though I've probably got every one in the world. Let's see what this one does. It's a little bit richer than the other one that I had. Oh, that's lovely. So that kind of colour is really nice and just highlights that beautiful green emerald colour. So you'll find you probably won't have every colour that you need. You never do. Never have enough. And it's an ongoing thing to be trying to, you know, get more colours all the time. Okay. So that's rather lovely. And then as you move up into the head of the duck, you can see it's a lot darker. So as we've got this beautiful bright greeny blue going on here, but as you come around towards the beak, it gets quite dark. So I'm going to darken off some of that area now, and then we'll get into the beak area. So this is the blue violet again. So it's my go-to dark colour. And if it's not dark enough, then I can always add black, but this is where I start usually with my darks. So I feel like that's got too long or something. The beak needs to start a little bit before there. So I'm going to bring it back to about there, I think. Gosh, it's hard working flat, so different. I'm just using my pencil to kind of map out where all my things are going to sit. So I think the beak can come, yep, it's got to come back in. I had my head a little bit too long. Still might be a tad too long. And it actually should be a bit rounder just above the beak there. So you can see how the top of the head kind of rounds down towards the beak a little bit. So it needs to be a bit wider there. So the way I can see this is I've got my picture on my iPad and I've got one on my table, and I can also see what you can see. So the screen, you can see what me doing is what I'm looking at, and I can see the picture next to it on the screen. So that really helps too, because it's all kind of right there in front of me, and it's given me a really good perspective of how it should be. And based on that, I still need to make my head a little bit rounder. I don't want to go too round because then it'll be hard to undo. That's better, I think. Yeah. And so again, going to tip off my dust because you get a lot of dust. All right. So I'm quite happy with the shape of that now. I feel like that's on track. Might have to just straighten up this section at the back of the neck a little bit with a bit of blue, and I can come back into that afterwards and fiddle around with the greens and the blues. All right. So now I want to look at the beak and get that done. So the shape of it kind of comes down from the nose, and it's got this tiny little curve at the end and a little hook on the end, and then it comes around from the bottom of the face. So we've got two bits there. We've got the top and the bottom beak. I'm just penciling this in to get it in the right spot before I put my pastel into it. So if you've already got yours in and you're happy to go, then by all means grab your yellow or greeny colour and start to mark that in, or block it in, I should say. I just want to make sure I get that positioning right. I think that's okay. All right, so now we're going to dive in with the colour. So it's kind of a yellow-green colour. So I'm going to start off with my mustard yellow. It's a little bit too yellow, but that's okay. I'll go over it with green and quieten it down. And just go gently. So this is a smooth thing. It's not feathers, it's not water. It's a smooth, well, smoothish surface. And so we want to try and get a nice smooth effect. And to do that, you can just do, little lines, that kind of continuous lines that kind of join together without having any texture in there. So just go gently, go easy, and don't, put down too much too soon. So I just like to tread lightly and then test everything, check everything, see if it's in the right spot. And then if you're happy with it, you can then add your other colours. So on the very edge of the beak, we have a white shine, and that's what's keeping it separated or standing apart from the water, because it's very similar colours, isn't it? It's got that kind of greeny yellow tinge, which is in the water as well. So, no, I've brought it up too high. That's annoying. So now I've got to try and get that out. So the top of it is too high on the face. Just using my eraser to remove that and bring it down a little bit lower. Otherwise it kind of bleeds into the face too much when the face is actually a separate part. So the beak kind of comes out about there, head it up to, yeah, that's better. So now I've done that, I've got to fix up the water behind it first, because otherwise it's going to be too hard to get in there later. And try to make that look like it's a continuous flow behind the duck's head. And I can sharpen up the edges of the head with my pencil if you have one, which are wonderful. That's why it's always good to have a little black pencil hanging around, just to get those darker edges and the sharper line. Sometimes you want to get a really crisp line, and often your pastels, don't do it so easily because they're crumbly and they're chunky. So if you have a pencil handy, it's really good. Okay. So now I've got to get a bit of green in there to try and green that up a little bit and not leave it quite so yellow. But as I said, it's very much like the water. So the difference is this is a smooth thing. So what we want to do is try and get a lovely smooth finish to it. And it's just got a little hook on the end, nothing too obvious. Okay, and again, I'm going to come back with my pencil and just clean up those edges so that it's nice and crisp just in there. And notice there's a little bit of dark that comes into the bottom of that beak, so it's like it bleeds off the face and then comes around into the bottom beak there. I've also used my pencil to indicate the gap between the top and the bottom beak. You can only see those really clearly on that right side, and then as it goes towards the front of the beak, it kind of fades off a little bit, but there is another little crease on the tip of the beak as well. Who knew beaks were so complicated? Now I've looked at my head again and it's a little bit too round in some spots. So see how I'm always correcting, always fixing stuff up. So even when you get your drawing right at the very beginning, you'll find you might go outside the lines or make something a bit too fat. And often it's an accident because you are working with chunky bits of pastel that, are harder to control than something like a pencil or a brush. And so it's very easy to get too wide or too fat or to kind of go outside the lines. There you go, put my fingers in, see, wasn't going to do that. Could not help myself. So that's looking okay. I feel like the beak needs to have a little bit more tone in there. So obviously it's got the nostril that we haven't done yet. So I'm just going to tone that up a little bit through the top. Guys just started mowing or something next door. If you can't hear me, let me know. And I'll go shut some doors and things. And just finishing off that beak area. So that's quite, you know, an interesting little area to zoom in on and have a close look, because you can see where the skin and the beak meet, and the top of the beak actually has a little V that kind of heads up in towards the face, and then it comes down. So you've just got to kind of fiddle around a little bit with your colours and try to get that standing out. I feel like it's too much like the water. So how can we fix that? Maybe pop a bit of the purple and the emerald green in there. I can see a little bit of that in the tip of the beak, so maybe that's going to help to just keep it standing out from the water. So pop a bit of that on there. So don't be afraid to experiment with colours. Just try different things and see what works. And of course, I've got to put the light back on the edge of the top of the beak, so the light's catching the top of it too. So that's going to help to highlight it away from the water. The other thing we can do is, if it's not standing out on top of the water, is to darken the water off. So I could grab my blue violet, got my long stick of it now, just so I can see what I'm doing, and darken off around there so that it sort of helps to bring the beak forward a little bit. Okay. Then while I'm here, I'm going to put a bit more yellow in my water, so you can keep coming back in there and you know, highlighting sections as you see you might need to. Just wondering what purple might look like in there, just for fun. Not too bad actually. It gives it a nice kind of grey finish where I want it to be a little bit duller. Yeah. Purple and yellow are complementary, so they always look lovely together anyway. It kind of just warms it up a little bit, gives it a little bit more interest. So again, you can run around your water with, you know, other colours if you want to. I'm sure some of you, or all of you, would have found other colours that look amazing. Can't wait to see them all very soon. So we're going to hold them up shortly and have a look. Anyway, I've got to leave the water alone before I wreck it. Back to the duck. Okay, so I'm just going to lighten up this beak a little bit more. I can see it's got shadow and it's got tone, because obviously it's a solid object, so it's got to have some sort of form. And noticing that, and you know, the darker parts, etc., and putting in a little bit more light and dark might help to bring it forward a little bit. I'm also going to pop a bit more dark underneath through the bottom there. They're such a specific shape, aren't they? Okay. And then we've got to put the little nostril in, so you can use either a pastel or a pencil to do that. So I'm going to just use this little chunk of blue violet pastel and just use the edge of it. So the tricky part is getting just a spot on there without making it too big. So using pastels is, there's a real technique, isn't there? And the more you do it, the better you get at it. You learn to kind of hold things in different angles in different ways to get different effects. It's kind of cool, but it takes lots of practice. That's for sure. All right, now the eye, which is hardly visible. So what the eye is also a smooth excuse my hair, I was zooming in on my picture then. And it's a smooth object with a little shine on it. So where is the eye? It's up higher on the head, and it sits about there. So I'm just using my pencil to mark in where the eye is. I'm going to check and make sure that's in the right place. If you feel like you're not sure how you're going, it's always a good idea to stand up and walk away and then come back. So you'll get a much better perspective of something if you look away from it or look at it from a distance. I'm just going to shut the door because the guy's doing something with his neighbour. Okay. Now I've come back, actually. It's interesting. I say stand up and walk away, and I've come back and I've seen that the beak is still too yellow. It's really bothering me. So what I'm going to do is put a bit of orange in there. I know it's not orange, but I can, because I can. So I just want to make it a little bit different to the water and make it stand out a little bit more. So you might have other colours that are going to work really well for this. Yeah, that's looking better. Now it's come forward, so that's what we wanted. Okay, good. Now I've got another colour in my little collection there. So, actually, there is a little bit of orange or red. See that little bit on the face there? Or is there? That's interesting, because on the printout, there's a little orange line just there, but on my picture on my iPad, there isn't. So maybe there isn't. Well, let's say there isn't. I'm going to dab that in now because...
Doesn't it match the foot in the water?
Sorry?
Doesn't it match the orange foot in the water? Does it?
Having trouble hearing because the guy's got his motor running over there. Yeah, interesting. Okay, anyway, let's look at the eye. So I've got a little black dot where the eye is going to go, just in there, and I've done that with my pencil. And I'm going to pick up my white pencil or charcoal pencil. What is this? I think it's pastel. Yep. And we just need a little dot, just a dot. Right. Oop, I pressed too hard and it crumbled. Okay. So what was a little dot is now a bigger blob. But I can dab that in and soften it off, and I might tip off some of my dust. And then I can come back with my black pencil and just sort of quieten that down a little bit, because you don't want it to be really bright. It's just a tiny little dot that tells us where the eye sits. It's not super obvious. Okay, great. Now I'm just going to clean up the edges of the neck with my black pencil, because I need that to be kind of smooth as well. Even though it's feathers, it's got a fairly defined shape, and against the water, which is rougher and has more texture in it, I need that to sort of sit on the top a little bit more. Okay, and then we can just start touching things up. So I've got to get some white to pop on his neck, and I want to just put a few more little feathers around at the chest area there with my pale blue. It's not my pale blue, this one is. And just get a little bit of texture happening in there to make it a bit more interesting. Okay. And in the water, okay, so I'm just going to check the picture and make sure I'm happy with that. Still not convinced with the angle of the head. I feel like that needs to be a little bit darker down through the neck area and under the chin there to try and make it turn a bit more. I've just used my blue violet to darken that area off and get some shadow in there. Okay. All right, that'll do for now. I will come back and probably finish this off afterwards, but what I want to do is get a little bit more of the water running across through that reflection. So I'm just going to pick up my greeny colour and start to sort of just wipe it across. I've got it on its side because I don't want hard marks, but I just want soft marks that are going to break up that reflection a little bit and just soften it. So just around where the tail is and the top of the feathers here and across the head. So that will just kind of soften that off a little bit and then include it in the ripples of the water. And just, yeah, break those lines up. That's what reflections do. They kind of have broken lines through them, and they are softer. So they're not usually not as dark as the subject. All right, good. Now we need to get onto those little reeds because they're cool, aren't they? I think they look rather lovely, and they are, you know, a little highlight, I guess, and it breaks up the picture. So it's not just the duck we're looking at, and things like reeds and, you know, bits and pieces like that really make a picture a little bit more interesting. So let's pop those in and get the reflections for them in as well. So I've just got my green pastel here. What this does is it breaks the line of the water. So the reeds kind of just break it up a little bit and make it a bit more interesting. So when you draw in your reed, I'm going to do 2 colours on each one because one side's darker than the other. You can see there's light hitting on the right. And I'm just putting those lines in. So they're breaking up the pattern of the water, giving the picture some interest. Notice how tall they are and where they come to in relation to where the duck sits. So we've got 4 just here on the left that I've drawn in, and then we need to do their reflections. So you've got to pretty much do the opposite of what you just drew, and then give it a little wiggle so it has a bit of a reflection in it. You can see that the third one in has like a bend in it where the ripples start to turn into circular shapes. So that's really interesting. Now, they don't look like much yet, but once we get them a little bit lighter on the other side, they'll start to come alive. And we might just pop in the other ones over on the other side as well. So these ones sit just up above his little wing, and they start from the top of the page and come down just about even with the top of his head. And so again, they need to be reflections. So just do the opposite mark of what you did when you did the actual reed. And then there's 2 more over there on the far right that kind of come in together. So they'll go out together. It's like a V shape. So that just makes it a little bit more interesting. And then you can grab your lighter green. So my lighter green was this one, and just run it down the right-hand side of those to get the light on one side. So that kind of highlights it a little bit. And you can do the same on the others, just to get a little bit of variation in the greens. And then if you wanted to, you could darken off the left side even a little bit more. So I've got my big brand new blue violet here. So this is good. A big stick like this is good if you want to do a fine line because you've got more control. You can see better how it's looking and what you're doing. You just got to get the edge of it. That's the tricky bit. And then I can see in the reflection, there's also a little bit of shadow on these guys. So they're kind of a little darker. going down there through the water. And of course, they've got ripples through them too, so we can pop some ripples into the reflection of those in a second. And then you can do the same on the other little reeds, just pop a little bit of a dark shadow down the sides. I'm being very loose and not terribly careful here. So just popping that in there, so that gives them a little bit of texture, so they look like they're catching the light. If you want to catch the light even more and highlight them even more, then you can always grab your yellow. Who was that? Someone said something.
Oh, sorry, I was shouting at my dog.
Oh.
She's nudging my elbow.
Oh, must be lunchtime.
No.
So you can kind of just play around with your colours and your tones on those little bits of grass. See how that just breaks it up for us. It makes it a little bit more interesting, and creates, another movement and something else, just to take your eye away from the main character of the show, I guess. And of course, then pop a few little lines across in the water of those reflections, so that it breaks up those lines a little bit and they start to look like they're being reflected rather than just drawn over the top. So they kind of got to mix in with the water, got to kind of become part of that. And so you can just sweep your pastel across them randomly. So you just want to kind of press hard and then soft and vary the movement of your line to get a nice natural sort of effect going through there. And if you wanted to, you could lighten up your water even more in certain areas. You can have a bit of a play with that. I think this has worked out pretty all right, actually, considering I didn't practice, which was really naughty of me. So, yeah, you can keep working on that, but I would love to see how everybody went and what you've done. I'm sure there's some amazing, beautiful pieces out there. And we're going to hold them up in a minute and have a look. So what is it? 11:41. So we'll 1:45. We'll do that and have show and tell. And then if you feel inspired and you're not finished, you could keep going for the afternoon and finish it off. And don't forget to send them to me, because I love to get your photos and I love to put them in to the newsletter and up on Facebook and all that sort of stuff. It's great. And yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't fit everyone in today. I don't know what happened. I can't figure that bit out, but who knows? Who knows? It's all a mystery, really, all this technology business. So I'm just going to give you a couple more minutes to get that organised, get ready to show everybody. Show and tell. I like show and tell. It's fun. It's the fun bit. My new studio, or third bedroom, I should say, is very small at the next house. So I'll be flat out fitting in a desk and my pastels, I think. But I'll have a good go at it, have a good crack and see how we go. Brian's excited. He's got a massive shed. So I figured it's probably his turn to have something for him and all his woodwork. And he's madly building breadboards at the moment, so chopping boards and stuff like that he's doing, and he's got lots of orders, which is really cool. And yeah, he's loving it. So for him to have some space to build lots of things will be really nice. And it's up the back of behind the house, which would be nice because it won't be so noisy for me. And there is a little outdoor area, so I'm going to try and see if we can maybe do some summer stuff there. And yeah, try and at least do seasonal Sunday workshops for autumn and spring and so forth, because they're always a nice thing to do. Always lots of fun.
Sound wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful. It's wonderful how
Yeah.
it's all worked out. Yeah, it's good. So there you go. COVID has done some good stuff, or different stuff, I should say. You know, not necessarily good, but different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Been interesting times. All right, I'm going to flick back my screen to look at you, and then we can see how everybody went, if that's all right. And
Yep.
I'm going to stop recording now. So for anyone who happens to watch this video down the track, thanks for coming. Hope you had a great time. If you have any questions, please get in touch with me.